Welcome to another episode of That's Some Crazy Shit with Kelly and James. My name is Kelly and my co-host is Mr. James. What's happening, dude?
What's going on, Miss Kelly? Things are good here in the corner studio.
Well, you know how we were talking about, maybe not that long ago, how where you are, how Utah had experienced a drought, right? There was, big drought. And so I thought it was interesting how they said to pray for water, but nobody ever thought about dowsing for water.
That's true,
Because that leads us to our next guest, who is a water dowser.
And this is pretty cool stuff, man. How it works out. And you can find all sorts of stuff dowsing.
So tell us what dowsing is, James.
So dowsing is, the way I understand it, is you have a person who has a piece of wood shaped in a Y shape. That was traditional. And then they would go along and they would look for signs. Let's say you're looking for water. And then the dowsing would go down. The stick would go down towards whatever you're looking for. Now, more modern people, or more modern technique, is to use copper wire. And they'll bend that, and then as they go, the wire will cross, indicating whatever they're looking for.
Oh yeah, I have seen those before, but I've also seen the old way with the stick.
Yeah.
Right? Someone will just go cut a stick off a tree,
That's
make sure it's like the way, and find water that way. So this guy is a water dowser. He didn't, set out to be one. He kind of just figured it out one day that he could douse for water. And so he's going to come on and tell us about it. Not only is he a water dowser, he's an author. He's written a book series. So he'll be talking about his books as well.
Right on, I'm excited.
Yeah, so let's bring him on. Welcome to the podcast, author and water dowser, Charlie Sheldon. Charlie, thank you for being here so much. We appreciate you coming on to talk about not only your books, but dowsing, because that's a topic that I think me and James have talked about, but I don't think we've talked about it necessarily on the podcast.
No,
right? So I know that we were excited to find somebody who actually does it and how you do it and what that's like, and we just want to hear everything.
Okay.
Let's start at the beginning.
Go.
Well, in terms of dowsing, which I call finding water with a stick, basically, it's much more than that. I will preface this by saying that there will be people among your audience who will believe what I'm about to say. But there'll also be many people in the audience who will not believe a word of this and think it's a complete con. And there's nothing I can say that'll change that mind. I first heard about dowsing from my father. When I was a little boy, about 3 years old, we lived in a little hill town in western Massachusetts called Shutesbury, and some people next door were trying to dig a well for water, and they dug 2 or 3 wells and not found water. And finally, the owner got a dowser to come over and douse, meaning a man who had a stick that he'd cut, and he would wander over the property with the stick, and when it pulled down, that's where he'd say there'd be water. And I can remember, I don't remember seeing it. I was there with him, my father, when he told me about this later when I was 6 or 7 years old, asking, do you remember when the dowser was here? And I didn't. But he explained that this guy'd come over with a stick that he always used, the same stick, a Y-shaped stick, and he held it out in front of him. That's all my dad told me at the time. He held it out in front of him, and the stick pulled down over at a certain point in the yard, and he kept walking back and forth across that place. He said, here's where your water is. Now, that's the first I heard of it. Okay. And then I was kind of interested in it, and life went on. Then when I was 19, I think, I spent a summer cutting brush under power lines in Western Massachusetts all summer long. We had a crew of people. And one of the guys in the crew was this other kid who said one day, I can douse for water. And I said, oh, sure. Right. And he went out, he walked over and he cut a twig from a tree. I don't remember what kind of tree it was. It might have been a maple tree. We were way up high in the hills of Western Massachusetts and it was forested, but under the power line, it was just brush and saplings. He cut this twig and he started walking around in the dirt road running under the power line, and the twig pulled down on him. And I could see that he was struggling with the twig to keep it from moving, but it would pull down. The way he held it was it was a Y-shaped twig, and he held it with the leg or post of the Y facing up, upside down, and in his palms, in each palm, he held one of the two sides of the Y, and with slight outward pressure. So he's holding the Y, it's pointing up vertically out in front of him with a little pressure on his palms. And then as he walked along, the Y came toward his chest down to the ground as he walked over this area. And you could see he was fighting it. But I thought he was faking it, of course, because I'm thinking, oh, he's just a good actor. So he said, so another guy tried it, and Peter, and it didn't work for him, because this doesn't work for everybody. He didn't feel anything, and he walked over his ass, it's just baloney. So then I cut a stick, and I don't remember what kind, I think it was a willow that I cut, a water-loving stick. Same thing, Y-shaped, held it out in front of me, walking along with my arms out, and I got near where this guy his stick had gone down, and the stick started to pull toward me. And it was a force. I mean, I could feel it turning as I kept walking. It pulled down, and I did everything I could holding it to prevent it from turning down. And what happened was, because it was a green stick and had a lot of water in it, the stick turned down so it pointed down to the ground, but it twisted off the bark in my hands. So in other words, when I got there, I had the stick was down and the bark was still in my hands, but had been stripped away from the wood underneath. The force had been so strong.
Wow.
And it worked for me. And so I thought, okay. And so but then later, then I had a couple of really extraordinary experiences with it. And I learned then, after the experience with this guy in 1966, that there are professional dowsers, and some of them, they do it many different ways, and I've seen some of the different ways they do it. Some will cut a fresh stick every time. Others will use the same stick for years. I also learned that people can use dowsing to find like metals. In other words, I learned, in other words, you could put a coin in the end of your stick and find buried coins. It'll pull down the coin to the coin. I learned that people often in public highway departments douse for buried utilities. They use these metal rods and they'll walk along, and when the rods line up, that's where the pipe is underneath them. A friend of my father's was a uranium miner, and he told me that, sort of lowered his voice and said, actually, people douse for uranium.
Wow.
And so this is all, okay, so this, and I kept doing it, and I never actually found a well for somebody, but I felt the force many times. And the force is real. And I don't think anyone's ever explained what the force is. And again, there will be people who will say that I'm completely BSing you. I'm just, this is all completely untrue. But I've had the experience. So then I'll tell you one more story, and then you can ask some questions. So in 1972, I'm on Cape Cod. I was commercially fishing on Cape Cod, and I had this friend who had claimed some unknown ownership land up in the highlands in the back country of the Cape. In New England, you can do that. If land's unknown, you can claim it. And he found this unknown land, and he couldn't find an owner, and he claimed it. And he was going to build a geodesic dome there. He was like a hippie, right? So he decided, and I went out to see his land before he started doing any work. And I said, well, I can show you where to dig for water. I can dowse for water. And this is like in March or something. And I cut a stick and wandered around, and pretty soon the stick pulled down, and his land was on a piece of high ground about 80 feet above the nearest pond. You could see through the leafless trees in March. So I walked back and forth, and the stick pulled down for me, and I gave the stick to Peter, and he walked back and forth, and the stick didn't pull down for him. Now, this was back in the days, 1973, when some of us inhaled. So we were in a slightly altered state. And so then Peter walked with a stick, and nothing happened. So I said, okay, Peter, you walk again over the spot, but I'll walk in front of you, and I'll put my fingertips on each end of the stick as it comes out from your palm. So I'm in contact with the stick while you're holding it. So that's what we did. He walked ahead with the stick, and I'm holding my fingertips on the ends of the stick, and Peter's walking, and the stick pulls down on him because I'm touching the stick. And he starts getting very distressed, and he says, well, you're twisting your fingers, do it with your wrists. So we did it again with just my wrists, and the stick pulled down on him again. At which point he threw the stick away and would not talk to me about this ever. But then, this is true, 4 or 5 years later, I run into him, and he'd found water. And the way Peter dug his well was, because he was all natural, right? Instead of getting a drill and drilling a hole, he got threaded steel pipe and a weight on a tripod. He just pounded the pipe into the ground, blow by blow. And he spends all summer driving the pipe down. He gets the pipe 20 feet below where the pond is next to him, and there's no water. And he's totally at wit's end, and he runs into a guy. He told me this. He runs into a guy in a coffee shop in Chatham, and the guy says, well, I'm a dowser. I can, if there's water, I'll find it. And Peter, remembering the incident with me, but this guy seemed like an old straight guy who wasn't, smoking dope. He was a normal guy. So the guy came out with him, and the guy said, now I talked to my stick. So he stood right over where Peter dug the well, and he said, is there water here? And the stick turned down. And then he said, now we're going to find out how deep the water is. He says, is the water 120 feet down? The stick didn't do anything. Is it 150 feet down? It turned down. He said, well, it's between 120 and 150 feet. And he did the process of elimination, and he ended up finally announced to Peter, he said, you're going to find the water at 146 feet, and it's a seam 20 feet thick, and it's flowing southwest. And Peter was totally freaked out by this. But okay, so then he went back to pounding the well because he still had 20 feet to go. And he found water at 146 feet, 8 inches.
Wow.
Now, that's true, but nobody's going to believe it, but that's true.
We believe you.
Yeah, we believe it. That's why we have our show, because this is crazy shit.
That's crazy shit.
It.
We believe you.
And I've taken other people out, right, who really analytical, techie people, right? And, data nerds, right? And they think this is witchcraft. And if it doesn't work with them, and then I walk in front of them and put my fingertips on it and it works with them, they uniformly get very weird, right? Because it troubles them. But then there's these other guys who it works with, right? And they get even more weird because they can't explain it. Oh, it's going to be water under pressure. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. Anyway, so to me, what I like about it so much is nobody's explained it. There are books written that debunk it and say it's a complete fantasy and it's not true and it doesn't happen, but it does happen. And so to me, it's wonderful because it's one of the last clear signs to me personally that there's still this unknown, there's some unknown forces here that we've yet to explain. And for some reason, for me, it's a great relief to think that we still have to be humble enough to know we don't know everything.
Exactly.
Well, there's, as somebody told us earlier today, there's a lot more that we don't know than what we do know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And part of, yeah. So I've done you're right. There's a lot we don't know. In fact, there's stuff we don't even, like Donald Rumsfeld said, right? The known unknowns, and then there are the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
These are like the unknown unknowns of things we don't know. So in like you say, I've written some books, I've written a bunch of fiction, and I've got this book series I've now written. It's not about dowsing. Dowsing is nowhere in the book, but it is very much about the power of ancient legend and the power of ancient truth, and the sense that true wisdom was found by very ancient people just as valid as any true wisdom today, because I don't think we've changed that much. And in some way, I'm trying to celebrate that with the stories I do, which are all fiction, of course.
So what's the name of the series? What are the name of the books?
The series is called the Strong Heart series, and there are 3 books in the series. And one of them, I can show you, right? One of them is, I don't know if you can read it, but one of them is Strong Heart. And this was published in 2017. And it's about an ornery young girl who shows up on her grandfather's door, and he doesn't even know he has a granddaughter. And he's about to go on this hiking trip, and he takes her with him, thinking he'll teach her something about grit. And they figure out pretty quickly that she's teaching them. And they have a great adventure. And then the second book is called Adrift. And it's set 4 months after the first book. Some of the same characters, a sea story really. And then the third and final book, which is this one called Totem, is set the following summer back in the park. It's three separate standalone books, but they tell one grand story, I guess you could say. It's fiction, set in the Olympic Peninsula in North Washington, and it's about magic realism and coming of age and ancient truth, I guess.
That's very cool. So, Charlie, I mean, when you think about, as you said, ancient truths and everything, give me an example of an ancient truth.
Well, the whole premise of this series is a perfect example of that. When I came out to the Pacific Northwest in 1990, I ended up working for a port out here, and one of the jobs we had to do was there were Indian tribes with treaties that had fishing rights right in the harbor where these big ships would come to unload cargo. So there needed to be a lot of coordination between the native tribes and these huge government bureaucracies. And it was very difficult, it was a very difficult, complicated negotiation. And I ended up doing that for 20 years and hopefully learned a little bit about the tribes and got to know some of the people and learned a little bit about their history. And one of the interesting things is all first peoples of North America, their legends all say they've always been here. They didn't come over here on the Bering Land Bridge. They've always been here. And in fact, if you say to someone who's a first person from here that, you came over in the land bridge, you're essentially telling them, because you came over here 12,000 years ago, you're one of the most recent group of beings, and that's seen as an insult, right? Probably rightfully so. So there's no scientific evidence that supports that legend, really, right? And there's a lot of evidence that of course, supports other theories, like hominids originally arose in Africa, and then they came to Eurasia, and modern people, whatever that means, arose somewhere in Africa or in the Middle East, and then populated the world. So I just wanted to play with that a little bit, not so much because it could be true or not, but just because people hold on to these theories so strongly as if they're God's truth, but they're only theories.
Right.
Theories get changed, and we resist changing if we get an idea, a dogma, if you want to change people's minds, you have to struggle to do it, because so many people will fight to hold their view, because their whole reputation depends on that view. So anyway, so that was it. But in the end, of course, if you're going to write a story or a series of stories, the story has to be the most interesting part of it. You know, you want to know what happens to the characters and so on, and hopefully I'm able to do that.
Is the series, are those the only books that you've written? Are you still writing today, or do you have other works, stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, I've written a few other books, and I've been doing this for a long time. I'm a prolific and very unsuccessful writer. So I've been doing this for 30 years. I've written 8 or 9 novels, but some of them are just whodunits, you know, like little capers. I fished for many, many years, and then went to sea for years as a merchant sailor. And so I've written a story about the fishing industry called Chasing Davy Jones, which is just about that industry, you know. But this series, which is more recent, I've been doing for the last 10 years and finished it now, is more involved, because it asks some more important questions about what is family and where do we all come from and what's really important and how true are some of these legends, and what's when I started this series, I wanted to write about what I think should be either the first deadly sin or the 8th deadly sin, which is, in my opinion, zealotry. You know, those people who are sure they're right about everything, tell you how to live your life and what you need to do with yourself and your body. And I think those are the most dangerous people in the universe.
No, I'd have to agree.
I would agree with you. Yes, I would agree.
I tried to write a story that, it's really hard when you're writing fiction to make a point without it becoming a political or educational tract, which isn't interesting to anybody. You know, it has to be a story. You want to know what's going to happen to the characters. And if along the way you're provoked to think, could that be true? Or maybe that's true. That's the way to get people to consider different realities, not by telling them that they're different, by sort of encouraging them to think about things a little differently. So one of the advantages in me writing about people going into the wilderness or being at sea, and there's sections in these stories set in the very, very ancient past as well as today, is I tried to make them timeless and not dependent on current technology, because 10 years from now, those stories will be dated, because, you know, their phones will have changed, everything will change. So by setting stories in the wilderness or at sea, you're kind of away from that technological link that can date anything. I wanted to write something more timeless, I guess you could say. So,
well, sounds like you're an author, even though you say an unsuccessful one.
Oh, well, you've got to be driven to it, because it's mostly, how do I describe this? In those times when you're watching the story appear, which to me is kind of what it's like, and it doesn't take that long for me to write the first draft of a story, but it takes 3 years to finish it, to get it right, to move things around, to take out everything you don't need, right? And when you're in that place, when the story is happening, that's a great place to be. I mean, it's frustrating, but it's exciting, and you're kind of, for me, watch it happen, and I'm just describing what I see, and it's an adventure. But the other part of it is getting your stories out there in a way that people will read them is the most frustrating, humiliating, rejection-filled nightmare you can possibly imagine. So, and it uses a completely different part of your brain, right? And I think I'm okay at telling the stories. I used to love, when I fished, the guy I used to fish with was a great storyteller. You know, and he'd start telling a story and you were being transported to a wonderful place. You know, he'd just tell these great stories. And I always thought, that's a gift, you know, and I actually think that the ability of people to tell stories to each other is what made us who we are, because how else do you carry culture and everything before writing unless you have stories to tell, right? So I wanted to write a book made up of stories that sort of showed how people became people by telling stories, if you understand what I mean.
Are they on audio? Are they on audiobooks?
One of them is. The first one, Strongheart, is on audiobook. The other two are not. My bank doesn't let me do that right now. I'd like to get them on audio. They're all available on. You can get them from bookstores. You can get them from Amazon. There's an ebook version or a Kindle version of all three books. Plus, if you go to Online Book Club, which is a group of people who like books, in a few weeks, one of the books will be free on that, the first book in the series, because the third book, Totem, is formally being launched the 29th of October. And although it's available today, and so I'm trying to get people to read the earlier books in the series to get interested.
Well, congratulations.
I have a question for you, Charlie. So, we've talked about how, I'm a comic nerd.
Right.
And, so all these Marvel movies are just, dreams come true for mine. If a company were to come to you and say, we want to make a movie of one of your books, which one would you want them to do?
Probably the first one. I think that would be a great movie, especially with the special effects abilities they have today. So, I mean, there's a big chunk of these stories that are set back somewhere between 20 and 80,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
There were saber-toothed cats and mammoths, and great ice age. I mean, dramatic stuff. So with the kind of digital stuff people can do today, it'd be a great story. That would be a story. I think it'd be a good movie. They make good comics too. It's just, I every now and then someone gets a hold of me wanting to talk about movies, and usually it's not a legitimate request, when I figure it out. So,
well, when it does happen, I will tell you, they will option all three stories and release the whole series. So not just one. We don't want one. So that.
Oh yeah, we want all three.
Right.
We want all
three.
If you were going to do the second one first, or.
Yeah. So the ones that you've had that are not legit, it's because they're not interested in all three. So what I'm saying is, we're going to do some manifesting, Charlie.
Yeah.
Is that when they do approach you with that deal, it will be for all three movies all three books up front, and it will be. And they'll help you market it as the series, right? It's the next like Harry Potter, only shorter.
Right. Well, you could. The way they've been written, they've been carefully written to stand alone. In other words, you don't have to read them in any particular order. It's better to read them 1, 2, 3, because then you get the backstory, the characters. But you can start in the second book or the third book, and then hopefully you want to go back and read the earlier ones because you don't really know what happened that led up to it.
Well, they did it with Star Wars, so I mean, it's workable.
Yeah, and this could be turned. These could be turned into at least 3 movies, maybe more.
Well, we hope that for you, either a movie or a series. I love it if your work could go from what you see, and then somebody can translate it, and then we all get to see it.
Yeah.
And I just want to get in there. We want to interview when this happens.
you got it.
Because we're the ones that said it was going to happen.
Yeah. No, that's right. No, I think that's.
So when the credits are rolling at the end of the movies,
that's some crazy shit's going to be up there.
There you go.
That would be some crazy shit.
There you go. And that would be some crazy shit. Charlie, we've enjoyed having you. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. It's been great talking with you. And if you do try dowsing, cut a stick from a tree that likes water, like a willow or something that has some water in it. Then you'll find the force more quickly.
Okay. Well, thanks. Great dowsing tip. Thank you so much, Charlie.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right. I hope Charlie remembers us when they make his movie.
Right? Said we're gonna manifest that trilogy. That
would be bad. I'm gonna get those books. They do sound bad. I need to stop saying bad. Sorry, that's my word. They do sound like excellent reads.
Yeah, I really like talking to him. His dowsing stories were funny because he lost a friend. He freaked his friend out. And then his friend used the dowser anyway to find water.
Serious? What's up with that?
Right? And that dude like gave him like even more specific than he did. Told him like how far down to go and everything. So that dowsing is real. And have you ever tried it, James? Have you ever tried to douse for water?
No, I'd like to try it. That'd be, this is my personal thing. If I ever wanted to try it, he said, to use wood. But I always thought if you were to use copper tubes and then have the copper wire in the tube, so you're holding onto the tube and you're not influencing the wire in any way. That's just me being, I don't know, skeptical, because I still think you can maybe move it somehow with your hand. But if you had it in that way, it would be independent of your hand.
Well, why not just go cut off a stick off a tree and try it that way?
Well, I don't know what a willow tree looks like. I'm not like tree savvy.
But it doesn't have to be a willow tree.
That's what he said. He said cut trees that were more,
trees that like water.
Right.
So,
and I live in Utah.
Okay. I'm sure there are trees there that like water.
Well, once again, I'm not what are they? They're treeologists.
Is that a thing?
No, I think what are they called?
An arborist?
Arborist, yes.
A treeologist.
I had to go though.
That's funny. No, I was like, I don't think that's a thing. But okay, I get where you're coming from. No, I like talking to him. That was interesting, water dowsing. So I've never tried it, never really thought about it, but maybe I'll go out in the backyard, cut myself a stick, see what's up.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. Like you found like a stash of gold from the pioneer days.
Yeah, that would be incredibly crazy.
That would be crazy.
That would be. Well, James, I don't have anything left for today. Next week, we have another guest. As always, you can get us on our website, which is
That's Some Crazy Shit podcast.com.
Yeah. You've got your blog, right? So
it's there.
You've written, yes.
I have written.
We've got good talk. We've got you. You're not going to write again?
I'm working on it.
Yeah, you need to work on that. That's what the blog is for, dude.
That is true. Keep your minds open, people.